What's happening, everybody? Ryan Thomas here, live on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, Facebook, YouTube channels. Thank you so much for tuning in. Tonight, we got a big night of fights. We got a lot of fights to dive into, but in particular, there are two fights tonight, two main events that I think it's very rare in this current landscape of combat sports that we have a big main event in mixed martial arts. And we have a big main event in boxing. Lamachenko, Lopez, Ortega, Korean Zombie. I'm going to dive into both fights, as well as my Week 6 fantasy football starts. Who are some of the players that you should be inserting into your lineup to ensure that you go home with a victory in Week 6? Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody. Went live with this video. Had some audio issues once again. It's the day and age that we're living in, trying to ensure that anyone that is tuning into this can hear me. If you can't, let me know. I'm shoring up my audio issues that I've had. Obviously recording this on my laptop, streaming it live on Facebook, streaming it live on YouTube. And as the Thomas Take Ticker says, fire away some comments. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Ryan Thomas Take, YouTube and Facebook, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Subscribe and like the YouTube and Facebook page. I would greatly appreciate it. When you guys subscribe, you get instant access to any time I go live at all, whether I'm on audio, whether I'm on visual, you name it, it's out there. These get converted to the audio profiles, so this very episode will also be available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. So it's Saturday night. Saturday night's all right for fighting, as Elton John once said, and this is the Thomas Take Sports Podcast Combat Sports Show, MMA and boxing preview and prediction for Ortega and the Korean Zombie. As well, my fantasy football Week 6 starts, maybe some sits as well. But let's dive into the main event, the UFC on ESPN Plus card, ESPN Plus Fight Night card, Brian Ortega, Korean Zombie. It's finally here. I am so thankful that we finally have the ability to watch this fight. I think a big storyline heading into this fight is the fact that Brian Ortega has been out of the game, out of the fight game for 2 years now. And he is finally back, finally willing, ready, willing, and able to return against not just any opponent, but the Korean Zombie, Chan Sung Jung. If you have never watched Ortega fight, if you have never watched the Korean Zombie fight, if you have watched either one of these fighters fight over the course of their careers, you would know that this fight is going to be a barn burner. If you don't know, now you know, in the words of Dana White, this fight has all the potential in the world to be one of the best fights in UFC MMA history. The pace that both of these guys fight with is hellacious. There is bad blood. Both camps of both Ortega and the Korean Zombie have talked ton of smack over the course of the last 2 years, and we are finally here tonight. ESPN Plus, you'll be able to check that out. As I said, the big storyline in this fight is that Brian Ortega has been out of the game for 2 years, out of commission. He had a horrifying loss to Max Holloway for the UFC Featherweight Championship. It was a fight of the night performance on the part of both Max Holloway and Brian Ortega. Going into that bout, Brian Ortega was looked at as a fighter that would cause real problems for Max Holloway, and he didn't. You know, Max Holloway was a fight of the night performance by both fighters, but at the same time, Ortega was on the receiving end of a hellacious beating and was on the receiving end of a beating that essentially put him out for 2 years. December of 2018. Fast forward 2 years later, October of 2020, Brian Ortega is now back, and he's not taking on just some easy fight. He's not taking on the easiest fight in the division. He's taking on, in my opinion, outside of Holloway, outside of Volkanovski, the current UFC featherweight champ, the toughest fighter in the division, and one of the toughest matchups for anyone in the UFC in the Korean Zombie. I go back to the WEC days. WEC days were some of the best days in the world of MMA. And there are a few fighters that I think of. Uriah Faber is one of them. Dominic Cruz is another. Brian Stan is another. Chael Sonnen is another. But a guy that I have fresh in my mind is Chan Sung Jung. He had one of the best barn burner fights that I've ever seen that took place at WEC 48 back in April of 2010, 10 years ago. He took on Leonard Garcia. And Chan Sung Jung has had quite a historic career in terms of the ups, the downs, the peaks, the valleys. Chan Sung Jung loses that fight via split decision. He then is knocked unconscious in his next fight via head kick by George Roop, who was a journeyman fighter at that time, who was considered long in the tooth at that time. In his first bout in the Ultimate Fighting Championship, he takes on Leonard Garcia in a rematch and wins that via twister submission, which had never been seen inside the UFC octagon before. This man literally pulled off a submission that had never been seen inside the octagon. That's how special this guy is. Chan Sung Jung, the Korean Zombie. He owns a win over one of the top 155-pounders in the world today, former interim UFC lightweight champion Dustin Poirier via technical submission, a Darce choke. That win, that fight, featherweight fight that was in the featherweight days of Dustin Poirier's career, that took place in 2012. He then was given a title shot against the great Jose Aldo in 2013 and lost that fight in the fourth round via TKO due to punches. Chan Sung Jung takes a 4-year hiatus from the sport to enlist in the military in Korea and commit himself to military service. Returns in 2017 versus the always dangerous, always entertaining Dennis Bermudez, wins that fight via KO. Then he loses a fight to Yair Rodriguez in the final second of the bout. More than a year later, February 4th, 2017, he fights Dennis Bermudez, then fights Yair Rodriguez November 10th, 2018, loses in the final second of that bout due to Yair Rodriguez throwing an elbow, spinning back elbow to the jaw of the Korean Zombie. With that comes, what's next for the Korean Zombie? He doesn't fight until June of 2019, and he fights Renato Moicano, who's a tough guy. He TKOs him in the first round. TKOs future UFC Hall of Famer, former UFC lightweight champion, and former UFC featherweight challenger, now current UFC bantamweight title challenger, Frankie Edgar, contender at 3 divisions inside the sport of mixed martial arts. He TKOs Frankie Edgar in the first round. Edgar took on that fight on short notice, but it was a fight indeed that, many wondered whether Chan Sung Jung, whether the Korean Zombie would be able to put it together, and he did. So as I look at the career of Chan Sung Jung, and I look at the record, 6 fights in 8 years. That is a period of inactivity there from August 3rd of 2013 to February 4th of 2017 that the Korean Zombie will never get back. He's 33 years old. He is in his prime, and you have to look at it from this perspective. The ability that Chan Sung Jung displays inside the octagon, the reason why he is called the Korean Zombie, is his ability to eat punches, to move forward like a zombie. And outside of the fact that this man is widely known for what I believe is the greatest T-shirt in mixed martial arts history, as Ariel Helwani said, I would agree with him. The greatest T-shirt in mixed martial arts history belongs to Chan Sung Jung. I truly believe that is a feat in and of itself when you consider that mixed martial arts was built off of T-shirts. I would say merchandise was probably the third biggest reason why mixed martial arts grew to the level that it has over the course of the last 15, 20 years. Tap Out, Affliction, all these outfitters, these fighters creating their own brands for fans to wear. The Korean Zombie had his own shirt created. I wish I had the shirt. I still love the shirt. I love the icon. I love the logo. I love it all. Maybe they'll bring it back, but the Korean Zombie, one of the best in the world, despite the fact that he was out of the sport for that long. And I look at the Korean Zombie as a fighter that he's so close. He's so close. Both of these guys are so close. That's what makes this fight so entertaining. That's what makes this fight so unique, is that both fighters are so damn close to a title shot. Both fighters have the ability to go in there tonight and take it. Go in there tonight and take their opportunity to not just win and win at a high level and compete at a high level. They have the opportunity to go win this fight, and the winner of this fight faces off against Alexander Volkanovski. And Volkanovski, for anyone that has, any, I guess, hater comments towards Volkanovski, I thought Volkanovski lost that last fight as well. I understand where you're coming from, but the judges score the fights, as we know. And we can't really do anything about it, unfortunately. We can say that, it is what it is as far as, the decision, but there's not really a whole lot we can do about it. Alexander Volkanovski is the UFC 145-pound champ. So the winner of this fight, in my opinion, should get the next title shot, because the Max Holloway-Volkanovski thing has played out a little bit. And I love Max a lot. I think he's a great fighter, but it's a real tough sell to put together a third straight fight between Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway. I think Max Holloway might need to fight and find a new opponent that is outside of Ortega or the Korean Zombie or Alexander Volkanovski. Maybe it would make more sense for Holloway to fight a Calvin Kattar or, someone that is ranked inside the UFC featherweight division. But I truly believe that this is a fight that will be one of the best in UFC history. I know that sounds crazy. We've had so many fights, but the potential that this fight has is through the roof. And to talk about Ortega for a moment, heading into this fight, we know that both of these guys wanted to fight one another. We know that both of these guys have wanted to fight one another for a long time. But to actually get both of these guys to sign on the bottom line, and for Brian Ortega to cut his hair, donate it to Locks of Love, Chan Sung Jung is looked at as a fan favorite in this sport. Both of these guys have such massive followings that this belongs in the history books as one of the most highly anticipated non-title fights in recent memory. And when I look at who can win this fight and who will lose this fight, it's very tough for me in here to pick and nitpick between both of these fighters, because they both have such an hellacious pace. They're both devastating strikers. Ortega's got great boxing, great jiu-jitsu. Korean Zombie is just nonstop. But when I look at this fight, I think of just that simple fact that the Korean Zombie is such a nonstop fighter. Brian Ortega's been out of it for a little while now. Chan Sung Jung is coming off of 2 wins, whereas Ortega's coming off a title fight loss that he just did not look good at all. What version of Brian Ortega is going to show up? That's my biggest question mark heading into this fight. I know what version the Korean Zombie is going to show up, the same one that fought Yair Rodriguez for 24 minutes and 59 seconds, only to be spinning back elbow KO'd. Very unfortunate, highly unfortunate for the Korean Zombie, but I think with that comes 2 straight wins that were dominant against Moicano and Edgar. And if the Korean Zombie can roll into another victory over Brian Ortega, he's the man at 145 pounds. That's the guy that deserves the title shot. And the title shot was once for the Korean Zombie. This would be twice for the Korean Zombie, but a lot has changed in terms of his skill set and within the sport of MMA. He has evolved, as has the sport evolved. So the Korean Zombie is my pick for this fight. I'm picking the Korean Zombie to win, and to win in dominant, devastating fashion. I'm not saying that Brian Ortega is going to give him an easy fight. I think it will be back and forth for a little while, but I think the finish for this fight will be a devastating finish for the winner, the Korean Zombie. So there you have it. That's my pick for the UFC main event tonight. And that's how I got it going down. Now, Lamachenko versus Lopez. This is a boxing bout, lightweight. We're going to find out who the best lightweight is in the world. And I love fights like this between Vasily Lamachenko, the Ukrainian professional boxer, three-weight world champion, having held the WBA, the WBO, and the Ring Magazine lightweight titles since 2014, or from 2014 to 2015, and the WBO junior lightweight title from 2016 to 2017. The amount of hardware that Vasily Lamachenko has accrued over the course of his career is ridiculous. The fact that Vasily Lamachenko accrued an amateur boxing record of 396 wins and 1 loss, with his only loss avenged 2 times. Competing in the featherweight and lightweight divisions, he won the silver medal in the 2007 World Championships, gold in the European Championships, consecutive gold in 08 and 12 Olympics, 2008, 2012 Olympics, consecutive gold at the 09, 2011 World Championships. He's known for this exceptional hand speed, the power, the timing, the fact that he is such an athlete that has the ability to stick and move at the rate and at the pace that he does. I am shocked that anyone could say that this guy is past his prime. I've read things like, oh, he's in his 30s now. He's not the same fighter. He's it's only a matter of time before he dwindles into not being the same fighter. And I get it. You're 32. You're taking on Teofimo Lopez, who is 23, who is undefeated, who has also represented himself at a very high level, holding the IBF lightweight title since 2019, obviously. But I just think the experience factor for Lomachenko in this fight, is leaps and bounds ahead of Teofimo Lopez. And the experience factor in this case, if Lomachenko was like 36 or 37, I'd be like, maybe not. But the fact that he is 32 and Lopez is 23, that to me is like, I think that Lomachenko is in his prime and Lopez is just not quite there yet. Not quite ready. I'm not quite ready to say that Lomachenko is past his prime. I'm just not quite there yet. So that's how I see it. That's how I got it. And you kind of get a hint as far as who my pick is for the fight. Lomachenko is my pick. I think there are 3 boxers right now in the world of boxing that deserve all the praise and all the accolades from all of us. All of us boxing fans should throw respect on Lomachenko's name, should throw respect on Triple G's name, should throw respect on Tyson Fury's name. Those are the 3 boxers in the world of boxing that deserve the most respect. Lomachenko, Fury, and Gennady Golovkin. Those are my big three boxers in the sport of boxing right now. I know there's a lot of new wave guys like Mikey Garcia. I really like him a lot. People say, well, why don't we put respect on Deontay Wilder? Why don't we put respect on Anthony Joshua? Well, Wilder lost to Fury twice. Or Wilder lost to Fury once, but it was so bad it felt like it was twice. The first fight, I truly feel like Wilder did lose to Fury twice. In all honesty, I felt like Wilder lost the first one. It was a draw. Felt like he lost that one. I thought Fury won that fight. And the second fight, he was just destroyed in that second fight. So, I think Tyson Fury is the biggest name in the sport right now, in the sport of boxing. But in terms of the lower weight classes, a guy that has carried the torch for the sport of boxing, Lamachenko is that guy. And I think he should have far more respect thrown on his name than what he has had over the course of the last, let's just say, 2 years. These last 2 years have been his best 2 years. As I read off his accomplishments, as I read off his accolades, this guy is one of the better boxers in the world. Athleticism, footwork, defense, agility, speed. He has every single attribute that you could ask for in a top tier and a top level boxer, and yet people don't respect him. I don't get it. I had the privilege of going to the International Boxing Hall of Fame a couple years back, and I got to see a pair of his trunks, and that was really cool. And I know that in terms of current boxing history and yesteryear boxing history, you put one against the other. Yesteryear beats current every single time. It's just the way that it is with the sport of boxing. You'll never beat the old history that boxing has, whether it's Rocky Marciano, Muhammad Ali, Roberto Duran, Sugar Ray Leonard. You're never going to beat, Sugar Ray Robinson in terms of the weight that these guys hold, pun intended, the weight that they hold as far as their legacies in the sport of boxing. But you can acknowledge who some of the best boxers are currently. There are eras of every single sport, and in this era, I think Vasily Lomachenko is one of the top 3 guys in the world. So there you have it. There you have it. Coach Schroeder says, if I were to bet a dog, who would you recommend? I don't know the betting lines, but I could just say in terms of who I would bet on, who's a fighter I would bet on. I would say that Caitlin Chukagian from Central New York area, she is fighting Jessica Andrade in the co-main event tonight for the UFC Fight Night card. I'm going to go with Caitlin Chukagian as a solid bet pick. I like what she has brought to the table since her title fight loss to Valentina Shevchenko, and I don't really like what I've seen from Andrade. I think Andrade is a little bit one-dimensional, so that's who I would say to bet on is Caitlin Chukagian. So that's that. That is that in terms of the boxing MMA discussion. Now we move forward, onward and upward, as I like to say, to fantasy football. Fantasy football is literally my favorite thing, probably outside of Christmas and probably outside of, sports itself. Like, it is sports, but, outside of the reality, fantasy is like right there. Christmas, Thanksgiving, obviously family is ranked up there, but fantasy football is one of my favorite things, one of my favorite hobbies. I consider it a hobby. I have plenty of leagues that I have commissioned over the course of the last 10 years. My league I've commissioned for 10 years, and we're in our 10th season, and little did we know this season would be such a odd season, right? But I will say that we have had a pretty solid season. I mean, COVID-19 has been a part of it, but at the same time, we've been able to function as a league. We've been able to push forward. We've been able to have some fun in this league over the last 6 weeks. But part of doing what I do is winning consistently, but also putting out quality content for the fantasy football fanatics out there that want to know who I think they should start. I get questions constantly on my Twitter, on my Instagram, on my Facebook, on my podcast while I'm live like this. Who should I start? So each and every week throughout the rest of the season, and I've done it a little bit here and there, I've dabbled into it, I'm going to dive into who I think you should start. Not who you should sit, who you should start. Who you should sit, the projections make that pretty easy to figure out. But what's the difference between quarterback A and quarterback B? Who do I think you should start? And in particular, let's break it down. Quarterbacks that will take over in week 6. I'm not looking for players that'll take part in my fantasy football matchup. I'm looking for players that will take over for me in my fantasy football matchup. And quarterbacks that will take over in week 6, I got 3 of them. My first quarterback that I believe will take over in week 6 is Ryan Fitzpatrick. Ryan Fitzpatrick, Fitzmagic is what he has been these last 4 weeks for fantasy football purposes. Pretty much any league that I've been a part of, he has scored 20 or more points in the last 4 weeks. Last week, he got me 29, 350 yards, and 3 touchdowns against the San Francisco 49ers defense. That leads me to believe, what the hell is Ryan Fitzpatrick going to put up against this low-ranked, all-time bad, dumpster fire, bum team that is the New York Jets? I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is knowing one thing throughout this season. He's knowing one thing. He's known one thing. That one thing is that this might be his last hurrah as a starting quarterback in the National Football League. So he damn sure is going to make the most of it. And he has made the most of it. He has been able to get the ball to Mike Gesicki. He's been able to get the ball to Preston Williams. He's been able to get the ball to Devontae Parker. The run game of the Miami Dolphins, which I'll dive into a little bit here in this segment, has been pretty solid as well. But the biggest statistic that I look at when I look at Ryan Fitzpatrick to date for fantasy football purposes this year, he is the 7th quarterback overall in 2020. He has been a top 10 fantasy football quarterback. If you would have told me that, I would have said you were nuts. But here we are. 2020 is a weird year. Ryan Fitzpatrick is living it up in South Beach with a supporting cast that I think is pretty damn decent. And the Miami Dolphins under Brian Flores, their defense is getting a little bit better each and every week. So Ryan Fitzpatrick is a guy that I think you should slide into your lineup. If he's unowned in your league, go get him. If he's available, if he's on another team's bench, try to buy low and get Fitz magic. Next quarterback that I really like, quarterback that I expect to take over, is Detroit Lions quarterback Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford is averaging 20.7 points per game with wide receiver Kenny Galladay healthy. With Kenny Galladay healthy now and active heading into this matchup against one of the worst secondaries in the National Football League, the Jacksonville Jaguars, I truly believe Matt Stafford will have one of his best days, if not his best day, of the 2020 season. And it's only a matter of time before this Detroit Lions offense gets cooking. Kenny Galladay is a big missing piece to this Detroit Lions offense. When Galladay is out, Matt Stafford is not the same. The Detroit Lions aren't the same. Kenny Galladay, one of the most underrated receivers in the National Football League, and I think Matt Stafford will find him early and often against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So a little bit of a duo prediction there, but I think Matt Stafford, obviously, if you're looking for a quarterback, that is a solid matchup for Stafford and the Lions. Third quarterback that I'm circling on my waiver ads list that I did not get. Apparently, I didn't have a low enough waiver, high enough waiver number. And that was Andy Dalton. The Red Rifle returns. This time he returns to Big D. With the injury to Dak Prescott, Andy Dalton has now slotted in as the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys with, I think, his best ever supporting cast. You look at the supporting cast: Ezekiel Elliott, one of the best running backs in the league, maybe the best, depending on who you ask. And you look at Amari Cooper, you look at Michael Gallup, you look at CeeDee Lamb. Man, that is a pretty damn good offense on paper. It's only a matter of time before they start clicking and make things happen to make a playoff push. But that's all up to Andy Dalton now. Andy Dalton, the keys to the Ferrari were put into his hands, and let's see what the Red Rifle does. I think the Red Rifle will return in a big way this upcoming week for the Dallas Cowboys, and he's a quarterback that, hey, if you're in 2 quarterback leagues, which I am in, can't get much worse than Andy. Can't get much better or worse than Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton is a consistent, decent quarterback. I don't want to say that I've ever thought, man, he stinks, man, he's bad. No, Andy Dalton's fair. He's average. But with this supporting cast, potentially he could be better than average. So I move forward to running backs. Running backs of the week. The number one waiver ad, I think, for most leagues is a player that slots in due to injury, a player that comes into the lineup due to injury. One guy goes out, this guy goes in, and he is benefited by the fact that he gets slotted into a fairly decent offense with some decent players on it, but he gets slotted into a matchup that is one of the best matchups that you could have for a running back versus an opposing defense, and that is Vikings running back Alexander Madison filling in for Dalvin Cook. Madison filling in for Dalvin Cook. Cook is out this week, so get him out of your lineup. Alexander Madison in for week 6 against one of the worst, if not the worst, run defense in the National Football League in the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons are hitting the reset button. They fired Coach Quinn. Better late than never, I guess. Too little too late for the Atlanta Falcons. They're hitting the reset button. Raheem Morris is now the interim head coach for the Atlanta Falcons, and I think that the Vikings are going to just, it should be a little bit of a shootout. Matty Ice should keep them in games. Kirk Cousins will keep the Vikings out of games, and we'll see what happens. But Alexander Madison, if the Vikings are smart, the Vikings want to run a smart offense, get the ball to Madison. He had 136 yards last week filling in for Dalvin Cook. I expect him to do at least over 100 in this really juicy matchup with the Atlanta Falcons. So Madison versus the Falcons, that's a solid running back. The juiciest matchup, though, I think for a running back this week that is flying under the radar, that has not been given the due that he deserves, is Myles Gaskin of the Miami Dolphins versus, as I said, the New Jersey Jets. The New Jersey Jets are such a terrible team. They are going nowhere fast. They will definitely be hitting the reset button as well. I would hope so for their sake. Now, for my sake, I want Adam Gase to be the head coach of the New York Jets in the next 35, 40 years, because that would mean that the Jets were terrible. That would mean that the team behind me, the Buffalo Bills, would add on to their championship banners as AFC East champions more often than not. But in reality, the NFL stands for not for long for a reason, and I think Adam Gase will stay on, or won't stay on. We'll stay on the rest of the season, but we'll be fired come season's end. Things get ugly, in this game, which they easily could. According to me, if I think that Fitzpatrick is a solid play this week, which I think he is, and if Myles Gaskin is my solid, juicy matchup running back play for this week, then maybe sooner rather than later, Adam Gase will get fired. But Myles Gaskin, the Dolphins have been feeding Gaskin the ball. We saw it from a viewing perspective with the Bills and the Dolphins, and I think Gaskin will get the ball from here on out far more than he has even the last few weeks. So Myles Gaskin, that's the guy that I'm really looking at. Okay, all right, you guys ready? My hot take of this episode of the Thomas Take Sports Podcast: tight end, the position of the tight end position, is at its lowest point in the history of fantasy football. Now, listen, my Andy Dalton statistic that blows my mind, and I want to talk about this. My Andy Dalton stat that blows my mind is that since 2011, Andy Dalton is third in quarterback rushing touchdowns. It's mind-blowing, right? It's mind-blowing. You wouldn't believe me if you wouldn't believe me saying that, but look it up. Third since 2011 in rushing touchdowns. That's an Andy Dalton stat. But for tight end fantasy, going into this season, based on how most drafts were seen and picked and drafted, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Mark Andrews, and Zach Ertz were considered the elite of the elite at the tight end position. Not so fast. A lot of people are wondering whether they should drop Zach Ertz. Mark Andrews has had his fair weeks. So weeks. George Kittle has been hurt. Travis Kelce has been Travis Kelce. So we can't say anything bad about him. But we thought that from the start of the season to the end of the season that those tight ends would be the top 4 tight ends. Well, what you're going to do when you got Dalton Schultz and Jimmy Graham, what you're going to do is you're going to either acquire via the waiver wire, or you are going to trade, what you're going to do, Jonnu Smith. What do you know? Jonnu Smith is out there in a wide variety of leagues. And I always say, if a player is owned, that doesn't mean he can't be owned on your team. You can make a trade. You can make an offer. There is more oftentimes than not where a trade can be made. Unless you got a really stubborn owner in your league that just doesn't want to trade his players, there is always a trade to be made. If you're in a dynasty league, you can trade picks. If you are in a league that you got deep depth at one position, maybe give up a running back. Maybe give up a wide receiver to make that tight end position that much better, because the tight end position is pretty sparse. It is at its worst point in fantasy football history, in my opinion. I think a lot of people would agree with me on that, and they would agree with me that Jonnu Smith is a tight end that they should own for their fantasy team. So there you have it. I'm Ryan Thomas. Big show, big show. 35 minutes of diving into Brian Ortega and Chan Sung Jung, the Korean Zombie, who will win that fight and why, as well as who will win the boxing bout. Lamachenko, Korean Zombie. Those are my picks for tonight's fights. Two really great main events, as well as quarterbacks that I believe will take over in week 6, who to start, 3 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 1 tight end. In a season that has been unlike any other, the tight end position has been a weak point for fantasy football purposes. I'm Ryan Thomas. Thank you so much for tuning into the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. Stay safe, take care, go Bills, and enjoy the fights tonight.